It's not every day that you get to speak to somebody working inside the Hollywood system. And today I have the pleasure of speaking with Chris Roessner. Chris wrote the film Sandcastle, starring Nicholas Hoult and Henry Cavill. This was picked up and distributed by Netflix in 2017 and was very successful. The screenplay made the 2012 Blacklist, which, as you'll hear in our interview, put it alongside some scripts that went on to win Academy Awards and others that went on to become very, very successful films. Chris joined the military straight out of high school because he had no other option to pay for his attendance to USC Film School. This was the summer of 2001. He had no idea what was coming. Before long, Chris was deployed to Iraq and was part of the first wave of the war. His experiences would go on to become the basis for the screenplay. If you haven't seen Sandcastle, I highly recommend that you check it out because Chris and I get quite into the details of the film and how the screenplay became a reality. Chris was extremely generous with his time and honesty. I'm sure you'll get something out of his insights, and I hope you enjoy it. And without any more preamble, here's Chris Roessner.
I started off, I was born in Canton, Ohio, which is like a very industrial Midwestern town. Obviously, when you come from a place like that, you have no ties to Hollywood whatsoever. But I grew up around a lot of very brash, profane people who, nobody had any money whatsoever. I mean, I grew up really, really, really poor. But the sort of currency that you had in those worlds were like your ability to tell a story and to go. And I think that kind of got into my bloodstream early on. And then I went to high school in Texas, in a small town called Temple. Also, no Hollywood connections whatsoever. But around high school is when I kind of got the bug, and I knew I wanted to work in entertainment. I didn't know that I wanted to be a writer. I was definitely writing at the time, but I was doing a lot of school plays and things like this. And then when I graduated, I really wanted to go to USC Film School, and I applied and I got in. And I remember the day that the really big glossy packet comes in the mail, and you see all these pictures of palm trees, and you see all these pictures of like kids with fancy dollies and stuff. And I was like, wow, this is going to be great. So I sit down with my mom and my stepdad, and we're going through the brochure, and I'm really, really excited about it. And I can tell that they do not share my excitement whatsoever. And then when we got to the end and we saw the tuition page, I kind of realized why they weren't excited. And it was a strange sort of moment in my life because it was the best day of my life, but probably one of the worst days of theirs. Because they weren't able. My mom said to me, she's like, we can't even afford to buy you a plane ticket to go look at this school, like let alone, tuition. So as is my nature for good and bad, I don't really sit in problems for very long. I tend to be a little impulsive about solving them. So after about 3 days of just kind of being angry about it, I just drove to a recruiter's office in like a strip mall in this small town. And I walked into the recruiter's office and said, hey, if I sign up, can I go to USC Film School? And of course, the recruiter was like, absolutely, man, come right on in.
I'd have the rest of my life to tell folks how I made history.
Door did that? I've seen guys rolling out with a lot worse.
The day that I signed up was July 11th, 2001. So 2 months before September 11th. So my expectation of what my experience was going to be was much, much different than what it turned out to be. So I was anticipating going to basic training, being gone for 6 months and then going to USC. But what actually happened is I finished basic training, and then I went to Iraq for a year and a half. And then by the time I got to California to go to school at USC, I was almost 21. So I was like a 21-year-old freshman. But the positive side of that is I know now that had I gone to USC when I was 17, I would not have made the most of it. You know what I mean? The number one complaint about film school is that they don't graduate filmmakers. They graduate film fetishists, or like gear fetishists. And it's like, obviously I want people to know how to use the equipment. Like, that's great. But like, I'm not going to pay a lot of money for that. I don't give me a camera until I have something to say. And it was, more conducive to the amount of money I was spending, and also just more conducive to who I was as a person at that time. I needed to figure out how I thought about the world and my place in it. And I needed to think long and hard about it. And I also needed to kind of try to make sense of this year and a half I just spent in Iraq. So I decided to become a poetry major, and I did that for 4 years. And then when I graduated, I applied to USC. It's called the Peter Stark Producing Program. It's an MFA, and it's like it's the business of film. There's like lots of you make films, and it's creative as well. But I mean, it is a very, very intense 2 years, and I figured if I could spend 4 years learning how to write and then go and do that, I would be a more well-rounded filmmaker. And
I think it was probably the smartest thing you could have done, because a lot of my peers, and I think a lot of people who will watch this are sort of like, they're just writers, and they're just writing scripts and putting them in competitions and hoping someone will pick them up. I'll get an agent, and then all my problems will be solved. And not that they actually think that, but they don't have another strategy. And then maybe not directors either. So they're just they just want to be a writer. And I really feel for them, because it's they're giving their heart and soul to something, and then hoping someone will buy it for 10 grand. And maybe the best they can hope is that maybe it goes somewhere, but maybe they sit on it for years and nothing ever happens. Whereas I think it sounds like the path you took really empowered you to sort of have that knowledge.
You're hitting on something that I extol the virtues of assuming that you're in a leadership position, regardless of what your job is,
Yeah.
And I am not interested, nor would I advise anyone to be a wait by the phone type of person. Like, this just isn't a business that rewards that. When I was in the master's program at USC, we had a class. Most of our classes were not on campus, and one of our classes was at the agency ICM, and it was taught by an agent. So he would do his job all day and then teach us at night. And he said something that I never forgot. He said, "Listen, if you're great, we will find you, we as an agents, but we'll probably be the last to know. When you're starting out, you have a lot of other concerns, like you have to pay your bills, and you have to work alongside writing." And my wife and I both did that for many years. And now all of our stress comes strictly from creative stress. One has to acknowledge that the entirety of their life, their ability to pay their mortgage, their ability to send their kids to school, is predicated on one thing and one thing only, which is your creative acumen. That's it. It's not enough to like have a good idea, to have a good note on a script and share it during a note session. Like, that's not enough. I mean, you really have to internalize and come to terms with the fact that where you go in your life and what you're able to afford to do and how you're able to care for the people that you care for, friends, family, etc., is dictated solely by your ability to write. And that is a scary proposition that I don't think anyone, myself included, is like really ready for. And even after I finished the movie and I was like, and I, had agents and everything was rocking and rolling, there was like some internal celebration happening, but like I was unaware, because how could you possibly be, of like what is coming, which is I have to sustain this now. Not only to sustain it, I have to sort of move up and navigate the difficult machinations of the business. I remember when I was in high school and I was really interested in Hollywood, there was this book I read, I think it was called like Writers on Writing or something, and there was a screenwriter. I don't remember the interview at all, but I remember one thing he said. He said, "Get out of the middle. The middle is a boneyard." And I think he's right about that. Like, I think since I've made a movie, and knock on wood, we're getting close to making a second one. But I never forgot that, even after 15 years, which is, it's one thing to get in, it's one thing to have agents, it's one thing to like say, this is my job. But then it's another thing to say, wow, there's this vast middle I have to try to get out of. And there's this very thin layer of people up here that's very hard to access. And then if you do get there, it's hard to stay there.
I think us outsiders, we don't really appreciate that it's just a machine. And
Yeah.
yes, getting there is hard enough, but staying there.
There's this interview I saw a long time ago, maybe 7 or 8 years ago, with Matt Damon, and he was talking about the whole experience of Good Will Hunting and all that. And he was saying something to the effect of, I learned at a young enough age, I was lucky enough to learn at a young age that this town isn't designed for anyone to succeed, right? At best, it's indifferent to your existence, right?
Yeah.
So your job is to figure out how to smash it and make it work for you. And I believe that that's true. I mean, it's not true all the time. Like, listen, sometimes there's, a conveyor belt that I can hop on and, do a job and grab some money. And like some of that stuff is there.
Yeah.
But none of rarely is that enjoyable. Rarely does it do anything for me other than, pay me. So I think regardless of where you are in your career, whether it's the very beginning or I promise you, and I've worked with these people at the very, very top, they're all trying to figure out a way to smash this place and make it work for them. I think that's just the reality of it. And I say that because there is, as you said, a lot of conversation about breaking in or making it in the business, and a lot of the ways in which people think about this business from the outside. And to be honest, a lot of people who have careers in this business also take this tactic of, how do I break in or meet the right people, or how do I get on the conveyor belt that takes me somewhere? And I assure you that is a recipe for sadness. Even if you're able to sell a script, like I know people that have sold a script and made $400,000 and then nothing. And listen, that's nothing to sneeze at, but $400,000 isn't going to like take care of you for the rest of your life. So like you have to ask yourself, are you here because you're trying to get one over, or are you here because you want to be here for like 30 or 40 years and you have something interesting that you want to achieve, and you want to be like with to take Sandcastle for existence, right? For example, that movie is much different than I had imagined it would turn out, but that doesn't mean that I'm not proud of it.
I just opened the PDF and it's different,
It is, and that's totally fine. Like that's as a writer, you write the script and then the movie becomes its own thing, which is how it should be. But I take pride in the fact that there was no movie and then there's a movie. If your stuff is good enough and you really, really care about the work that you're doing and you can convey that on the page, you can make a movie appear at any level in your career. I think that's a pretty awesome thing.
No one outside that gate wants you here. So you do your job, fix your problem.
There's a chance we're walking into something bigger. I don't think I'm cut out for that.
If anyone who doesn't know, Sandcastle made the 2012 blacklist, which is a massive achievement. And I've heard you talk about it, and I think you tell this story really well. The blacklist itself is it's seen as a bit of a promised land for emerging screenwriters, and so that's why I just think it's worth talking a little bit about with you.
Sure.
So just so I understand, I get this right, does that mean that it was widely read in the industry, but for whatever reason, it didn't make it onto their production slates for that year? Is that correct to say?
So here's what happens: is when a script goes out to the town. We'll just talk about Sandcastle because it's the film I know intimately.
Sure.
Is that movie got made like lightning fast?
Yeah.
And that was still 5 years after I finished writing it. That's crazy fast, especially for an independent war film,
Yeah.
So when something's on the blacklist, it has nothing to do with whether or not, it's a really great script, but it's not on the production schedule for that year. It's like all of those scripts, and especially the ones that get made, of which even of that list only a few do, they're going to get made 4 or 5 years from them. You know what I mean? So all of those scripts are basically like, this year, there's been X thousands of scripts that have passed around, and the 400 or 300 and some executives and agents around town who are kind of the tastemakers. They all vote on their favorite scripts of that year, and then the list is compiled. At least that's how it was when I did. I know the Blacklist is a little bit different now than when I did it, but 2012 was a great year. And I mean, seriously, like there was also on that list, there was a script called Comancheria, which became Hell or High Water, which Taylor Sheridan did. Yeah. Whiplash was on that list.
Right. Yeah.
Jojo Rabbit was on that list. It was just a hell of a year. And honestly, I would have been happy to make the Blacklist any year. Arrival was on that year, I think, too.
Right. Yeah.
I would have been happy to make the Blacklist any year, but like one of my like real honest early senses of like, man, I should keep doing this, was making it that particular year. Like it was just a very, very tough year, to be honest.
So I want to start talking about the film then, because I got a lot of questions for you.
Sure.
So I want to start just with this quote. So I know it's not in the script because I've just been reading it. A war story can't be true unless it's got some shame attached to it. You've also said in an interview before that you didn't write the script until you'd been back from Iraq for about 8 years.
Yeah.
And I wanted to know, did you have some shame where the Sandcastle was able to kind of provide some catharsis for, or was that?
This is a great question. So, well, there's it's sort of a two-parter. There's the mechanics of why that line's there and when it came up and why it was added in the film, and then there's the aspect of why it waited so long and if it was cathartic. So the second part first, I wrote it solely to be cathartic. And it's interesting because I think some people, I was a little surprised, maybe naive by this, but some people in the veteran community like saw the film as like, a veteran's attempt to like break into Hollywood, or like as if they had more of a cynical view of it. And these are people, of course, that are outside of Hollywood. And for me, it's quite laughable. It's like the idea that I would try to break, like that a person would say, oh, I'm going to scheme my way into Hollywood by writing a $10 million independent war movie. Like it's absurd. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I would be better off writing like, Battleship, the board game or something to break in,
Yep.
So I say that because the writing of the script was solely to be cathartic. That was it. I was any business idea that I had in my mind was, okay, maybe I'll get a manager and then I'll just go work at Starbucks and then write another one, So the idea that so much happened in the wake of it was completely insane to me. And but I finished that script and I gave it to some of my Hollywood friends on a Friday, and then by Sunday night, it was completely nuts. Like my phone was ringing on a Sunday night from agents and executives, people whose names I recognized and would otherwise be terrified of, because they're very, they're people that have power can be scary, so to like have my phone ring and talk to these people and have them be nice to me, and the fact that I had something to offer them, was really, really wonderful. But it happened that quick, even though there was, like a 10-year period before that of nothing happening. And then it happened really, really quick, and it was really life-changing. But that wasn't at all the impulse to write it. And I think that if I did sit down to write something strictly with the business in mind, one, I wouldn't have written that script. And if I did say, oh, I want to capitalize on my war story, like I also wouldn't have written that script. I would have written it completely differently. I would have made the lead character, Bradley Cooper deadlifting in the desert or something,
Absolutely. So I'll come back to this, but I've got a question about veteran responses to this film, but I want to lead into that in a minute. So this is kind of related, but so I see a lot of war films, but I don't often feel the danger in the combat scenes as much as so I think Sandcastle did this really well. I think it does a really good job of capturing like the confusion of the randomness of bullets pinging around in all directions, and I wanted to ask you sort of, do you feel it's fairly accurate and realistic Obviously, you have to make some compromises when you're making a
Sure.
film, just film logic and stuff like that. But were you kind of I know you must have been on set because you were an executive producer. So were you? Was everyone kind of turning to you and sort of saying, "Is this how we should do it?" Or like,
I like and maybe people that made the film would feel differently about my or how I approached my involvement. But the way that I felt that I should do it is say, like, let me just give you the philosophy as to where this is coming from, and then you decide how to execute it. And also, we had, military people on set as as liaisons and advisors and things like that. So I didn't, I was definitely there, and people asked me questions, and actors would ask me questions, and the director would ask me questions on occasion. But my whole thing was like, let me just give you the philosophy of how I want to portray action in a war film.
Yep.
There is, as I experienced, that there was no like, okay, man, the mission is take this hill, and then once you take the hill, you've taken the hill. Like, that's just not how Iraq worked. Not for me anyway.
Yep.
It was intensely confusing, and the people that made it and the people that died, completely nonsensical. And that there's a reason why in the film, spoiler alert for those who haven't seen it, the person who seems the most likely, the most tough person, the one who, if you had to put your money on somebody who's going to make it through the war experience, like that person's going to make it, and then they don't. And I think there's a real argument to be made for thinking Matt isn't going to make it, and he probably wouldn't make it unless he figured out a way to provide some value to his team. And as far as the action is concerned, there has to be an element of randomness to it. And there has to be an element of deep confusion about who wants to help you and who wants to hurt you, because you just don't know. Like, the very same people who you're shaking hands with during the day are going to be trying to shoot at you at night. And that's a hard thing to, especially when you're 18 years old, that's a hard thing to wrap your mind around morally. Like, how do you operate when you have to have trust, you have to build trust with the locals, but when the sun goes down, all bets are off, and now you don't know what's what anymore. And I think that was the only thing that I said. And then film it however you want. That's not my job, but that's my philosophy about it.
So this film actually shows soldiers in a lot of ways we don't often see. So first scene, a guy breaking his own hand in an attempt to escape combat.
Yeah.
And then these scenes later with the characters Burton and Enzo admitting that they're scared before going on the night op into town. And I wanted to find out if you had if you received any pushback from anybody about that. But before you answer that, it's got to be flagged that one of the biggest problems I have with movie stars today is that they only take on roles where they look cool.
Yeah.
And they get to be the badass guy, all movie, and they never, they don't do anything demeaning. The character doesn't do anything demeaning. And whereas Private Oka, played by Nicholas Hoult, there are moments where he's there's one particular moment I love where he gets stuck in the door of the Humvee. I mean, that more actors should do this. This is what actors should want to do.
A couple things. Nick Hoult is the big reason that movie exists. He stayed on that movie for 2 years waiting for it to get put together, and he never jumped off.
Yeah.
And he saw exactly what you are saying now in the script and the potential for the story. It's something different. And I have nothing but an immense amount of love and respect for that man. He just did a hell of a job, and I'm glad. I mean, it was inevitable because he's so good at what he does that he's having such an amazing run over the past couple years. He's just a great actor. And the other part of this I'm going to talk about actors choosing roles. And now this is where my gloves come off. I got some pushback for not having a lot of Americans playing American soldiers when the movie first was announced. It was a lot of British actors.
Yep.
And again, that comes from a lot of people outside of the industry doesn't understand how it works. And listen, I don't know if I'm going to get cream for this, but I also think it needs to be said. There is a real difference in my experience about trying to cast actors out of Britain versus actors out of America. And I love some American actors, don't get me wrong, right? But the number of considerations beyond the desire to play the role are fewer among British actors, and they're a lot higher among a lot of American actors. Like, and I don't fault them, because listen, it is hard to stay up there as an actor, right? And you have to consider your brand, and you have to consider what does your agent think, and what does your manager think. I totally get it, absolutely. And I don't know what it's like to have a job as a movie star, so I don't understand the pressure, so I can't fault you too much. All I can do is tell you from my perspective that the way in which the script was received among British actors was unbelievable. Even the British actors that read for the roles and didn't get the roles were just so fucking good.
Yep.
And that's just the reality, man. Like, listen, I wish it was the 70s. I wish we were making The Godfather, and I wish there was, a young Pacino and all this sort of stuff. Like, I really do. And maybe that'll start to happen again. And by the way, I'm not saying that there aren't, again, crystal clear here, there aren't amazing American actors that I love. But it's just been my experience that you got to make a movie. And if people have different considerations, like, I can't help you. I wrote the script that I wrote. And if getting stuck in the seatbelt, as opposed to being, a badass is enough for you to not do the movie, then I don't want you to fuck with me anyway. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it reminds me of John Wayne saying, "I don't shoot a guy in the back," kind of thing. It's like, well, you're not the character. But anyway, I'm glad that you say that, and I couldn't agree more. I do wish we were back in the 70s. It's definitely, like, by far the best decade of cinema in the world, and I wish we could go back there. But anyway, we are here right now. But so I also just wanted to point out some of my favorite moments and why I think it's important to point these things out. So apart from the scene with the shake, which obviously is just awesome, but it's the tiny vignettes that you have with the guys in their quarters, like the night that they lose Chutsky, the party scene. And then this scene, like, comparing lunches, I've got chicken, I've got an MRE.
Dude, I love that scene.
Yeah, it's a great scene. It's
improv, but I love that scene. I think it's,
of course, and it's important that it's not just nice. It's important, And Henry Cavill getting Nicholas Hoult to spray paint the dog green so it doesn't get shot. Those are details that only you could know and put in a movie, because you've done it. And I especially love the sat phone calls that Harper makes to his fiance, which from memory you only hear his side of it, and Logan Marshall Green is just a phenomenal actor. Incredible. So you just think but I love, you only get the slivers of info there, and that's what makes it better. But to me, that is some of the strongest writing in the film, because you could make the argument that not all of these scenes are strictly there to move the plot forward, but without them, the film is so diminished. And I think it's really crucial to point this out, especially for amateur writers who are really hung up on the kind of David Mamet, which I love David Mamet, but the principle of every scene has to move the story forward. Yes, I agree with that, but a scene can have a deeper function beyond moving the plot forward, and I suppose it's a bit like world building, like what you did in those scenes. And so I wanted to see, like, did you have to fight to keep any of that stuff in the script? Because it's the kind of thing a lot of people wouldn't get off the page. They would read it on the page and go, you can cut that, you don't need that.
I will say that I think the fact that I was a veteran, was writing about my own life, lent some credence and some latitude to some scenes that would otherwise maybe be challenged or questioned in a different way. But to talk about, there's a larger thing that we're talking about here as well when it comes to, every scene has to move the story forward and things like this. Well, the answer to that is yes, if that's the movie that you're writing, right? Like there's an interview with Tarantino where he was like, and I believe this firmly, and he says, listen, there's nothing wrong with 3-act story structure, but it's not the only game in town. And the problem I have, he's saying, and I agree, with a lot of movies today is that they're not stories, they're situations. And I don't write situations, I write stories. And that was an epiphany for me. And I mean, if I was to go back and do Sandcastle now, I would still tell the story the way that I did. I wouldn't tell a take the hill story. I have skills now that I think would help me tell the story better, but I've not been interested in, and this isn't passing judgment. Like, I'll watch plenty of movies that are situations where it feels like, someone shoots the gun in act 1 and you're just hauling ass to the end. Like, I will watch those movies, but I can't get up every morning for 6-7 months or longer and write those. Like, I have to feel like I'm telling a story that, like, once upon a time, and then the story unfolds. Like, that's what really pumps me up,
Yeah, you've got to work from your unconscious.
If you're writing that story, if you're writing a once upon a time, and you have way more latitude, the scenes have to be great. That's the only downside, and that's why Tarantino's so good, because every scene is amazing. But like, if you're doing something that's more character driven and more about interpersonal conflict, as opposed to like, someone's captured Air Force One and the president has to him off the plane.
Sure.
These are just different things, So it's like, when it comes to large rules, like, does every scene have to move the story forward? It's like, well, yes, if that's the movie that you're writing, and then no, if it's not the movie that you're writing. You know what I mean?
It's clear that you've taken some lessons from your poetry study, because I was going to talk about the moment near the end of the film where Nicholas Hall takes a shower. For me, it's great poetry. It says everything you need to say. It actually reminded me of a little bit of the end of Castaway, when Tom Hanks picks up a stove lighter and he flicks it on, and it's little flame, and great poetry. And even in that shower scene, like, you get the sense that no matter how much he washes himself, like, that dirt isn't coming off. But
shout out to the costume designer as well. We had a long conversation. This was another one of those philosophical conversations where she was like, what should I know? Like, are there pictures I should look at or whatever else? And I said, the one thing I've never seen that I remember from war is that there's like, there's a certain like white streams of like salt that just come from sweat, and they just stay here on your, so like everybody's uniform just has these like ribbons of salt on it.
Yeah.
And that's the most specific thing I can tell you. And like, when I go to sleep at night and I think about the war, I think about those salt ribbons. And she was like, got it.
Chris, you jumped the gun on me, because I was going to mention that later. One of the things I love about this film is the detail and the art direction, and particularly that stuff. And one of the things that's so noticeable is the sweat stains.
Yeah.
It's the dust that's on Henry Cavill's like cap, and you see actual, like, you see the white streaks from old sweat on, and it makes sense when you see it, but you think, I don't think I've seen that before in a war film.
I've never seen it. And the other thing too is, I mean, you'd have to talk to the art department and some of the other heads of the department. But another thing I'd said too, I was like, I said, to the extent that this helps, what I remember vividly from war is those salt stains, and that the entire like apparatus of war smells like diesel and like porta potties, because that's all you have. And I was like, if just imagine that's all you have for the entirety of a year and a half is, diesel and porta potties, and that's your life. And if you could just make that visual, that's what it is. And I think they did a hell of a job. I was very, very lucky about and blessed the people that worked on this film. It's really, really awesome. It's the great joy of making movies, is watching other people who have these gifts that you know nothing about just operate at a high level.
I definitely, and thanks for sending me the script. And I might, if it's okay with you, I might do a little bit of a follow-up where I talk about stuff that's actually on the page.
Sure.
Because one of the things I was going to ask you, because I wasn't expecting to actually get to see the script, was how you detail things on the page. Like, so I think a lot of amateur writers have a lot of trouble with scenes that are just sort of businessy, like where you've got soldiers doing cover and move, and the way they talk to each other, and how that's written on the page. And if you took like a scene. I think I forget where it is in Sandcastle. I think it's when they're trying to storm the building to get to get a position to get the sniper. And if you took what's in the film, you wrote it down right now, the whole page would be just dialogue that says, "Fuck, contact 3 o'clock. Roger that, 3 o'clock. Sergeant, you got the 6. No, I got the 6. Stay on 3. Stay on 3," and so on. Right. So it seems kind of businessy, but actually it reads really well. You know, when I look at it on the page, and like I think that's some of the hardest stuff to write, especially when you're writing beat by beat action of like they move this, then they do that, then they go through the door, then they go up the stairs, then
there is, I mean, to use another Tarantino quote, it's going to sound like I mean, he's a great writer, so of course I'm going to, talk about him, but he said, I believe that a script should feel like a finished product in and of itself. Like if we don't make the movie, I should feel like I can just publish this and people can read it, and it'll be an experience in and of itself. Like he doesn't subscribe to the like it's a blueprint. And
I agree with that.
I feel the exact same way. And I can tell immediately, and people in this town who are executives and agents of note anyway, they can tell when someone is like phoning in certain sections, or when they're like, no, every moment of this film means something to me and I'm trying to impart a feeling on you. So if I want to create a sense of urgency, then my prose is going to change. If I want to stop the reader in his or her tracks and like exist with the character for a minute, then I do that. Like if you should, this is a fascinating thing to read. If you can get, I think it's online, if you can get your hands on the Oliver Stone script for Scarface, when he introduces Scarface, like it's a block of text this long, but it is fucking gorgeous. I mean, you're not sort of like, oh, he parts his hair on board. I mean, you are just with this person, and it is incredible writing. So when people say like, oh, you should be sparse with your prose, it's like, well, yeah, if that's what the moment calls for. But if you can write prose like that, and you're meeting Scarface for the first time, you're meeting Tony Montana for the first time, you're meeting like, the title character, like, and you better make that sing. So like, you just have to know where you are in your script, the type of script that you're writing. And I mean, in no short order, you have to be a master of your craft. So you know where you are in the moment and what you're trying to convey to the reader. And that's sort of, and like, if you read, I always use as an example, but if you read Alex Garland's Ex Machina script, which is an incredible movie, but like you can read that script in like 30 minutes because it's just like bam, bam, bam. He's just moving through it. The one that I love is Sex, Lies, and Videotape. The Steven Soderbergh. It's just so readable. You just leaps off the page. But I agree. Like if you're a master of your craft, then you kind of actually end up hiding the craft. I think a lot of amateur people. They're trying to impress a little bit on the page, so they try to put a lot of technical stuff there by using like beat and and saying stuff like that and angle on this, and it's just a bit hard to read. It's like okay, do it if it's very, very important, but otherwise no. This is the shitty thing about talking about writing is that do it if you know how to do it, and don't do it if you don't know how to do it. You know what I mean? There are things that I know that I'm not good at, that I try to get better at, but like I don't try to do things that I don't know how to do or that the story doesn't call for. And to be honest, when you're talking about this idea of writing to impress, it's going to sound like a little bit of writer mumbo jumbo, but I hope it makes some sense, is that a skilled reader and certainly a writer can read a script and like get a sense of where the writer is writing from, like if I get a script and I'm reading, I'm like, oh, this person's trying to impress or whatever else, like I can feel that. And that puts a wall between me and the story, that puts a wall between me and the experience that you, the writer, want me to have. What I want from a writer is, I kind of want their brain to not be a part of the writing whatsoever. Like I want the writing to come. It's like, let's say we're writing a scene at a coffee shop. Let's just say it's a breakup scene between, a divorce scene, husband and a wife. The wife's going to tell the husband that she's been cheating on him for 6 months, and that's what it is, right? Before I write that scene, I better be there. I am there. I'm sitting at the table. I am playing the part of the woman, and then I make my best arguments. I do, I make it as real as possible to me. And then I go around to the other side of the table and I make it as real as possible, right? And I don't stop until I feel like I have just experienced that in some way.
Yep.
Because if I have not felt it, I can't make you feel it. And
Yep.
it doesn't mean that I have to like describe the fucking napkin that's on the table. But if that napkin becomes important, like if she picks up that napkin to like dab her eyes, okay, now that you can do that. But you just have to feel like you're there. And I want to feel like I'm reading a story written by a person who went through this whole thing, who has lived the lives of these characters and is honest. Like, I don't want you to be smart. I don't want you to be clever. Like, don't try to clever me. If cleverness happens organically, fine. But like, don't try to like impress me with your fucking pretzel twists. Impress me. Here, perfect example. If you watch, oh God, I can't even talk about it. It gets me emotional. If you watch Rain Man, there's a moment at the end of Rain Man where, Tom Cruise is like dropping off Dustin Hoffman and is going to like leave him be, and they're having this moment at a table and they're talking, and Tom Cruise says, I like being your big brother, right? I like being your big. It's the first time you say anything like that, right? And Dustin Hoffman just like leans his head towards him.
It's like an explosion of emotion, like
explosion of emotion.
Yeah,
because you realize in that moment, like, and that comes from two actors being there in the scene. Now, granted, as we can't all do that, as like that's a special skill that they have, right?
Yeah.
But in my mind, I'm trying to get to that place when I'm writing a scene. So something like that happens, and hopefully, even if I don't get there, hopefully I provide something for the actors to feel that in the moment, because I mean, those are the moments that are just devastating and iconic, and that's what you're hoping for. I'm not hoping for clever. I'm hoping for something surprising and beautiful and honest, and you just kind of have to be there in the moment to make that happen.
Absolutely. So I often talk with my friends about how you've got to put yourself in the script, or at least be aware that you are in the script, whether you think you are or not.
Right.
And learn to recognize where you are in the script, and don't shy away from that. Actually lean into it a bit. And you went into this with your interview in the final draft interview about how you met your biological father at age 27, and he was also in the army and special forces. And before we go on about that, the fact, I think you said that you initiated contact by sending him an email from Saddam's presidential palace.
That's right.
Which, I mean, I want to see that movie. I think that's a movie. But anyway, so I thought it was really great how open you were about that stuff. And I was wondering as well, the relationship between Henry Cavill's character and Nicholas Hoult's character. There's an arc that they have where he starts out quite remote and cold, and he won't even acknowledge Nicholas Hoult's character in the first scene that they're in together. Like, he won't address him until Sergeant Harper basically says, "Come on, hear him out." And then in their final scene together after the explosion, Henry Cavill comes and he's actually checking on him quite tenderly. So did you consciously think, or did you put it in there unconsciously and then later go, maybe that's kind of connected?
It's fascinating. I was so laser focused on Sergeant Harper being the father figure for Oker, and Logan Marshall Green absolutely crushed it. But then this amazing thing happens, and this is exactly what we're talking about with Henry Cavill's character. And this is, I'm sure, Henry Cavill doing the work and Nicholas Hoult doing the work, is that I was surprised when I saw like one of the later cuts of the movie that started happening. And then what I realized, and again, some of this stuff is conscious, but a lot of it is subconscious, and you just sort of see it, like other people internalize something you didn't know you were doing, and then it starts to happen. And then I just realized that by the end of the movie, that like everybody around Private Oker is a father figure, in the sense that they're trying to demonstrate their version of what it means to be a man. And what we really have is this young, 18, 19-year-old kid going off to war, the first time he's ever left the country, and now he's in Iraq, and he doesn't know anything. and he's looking for places to invest his energy, because if I act like this person, I'll survive. Or, if I do what this person wants me to do, then I'll contribute to the team. And I realized that all of them sort of played a part in their own way. Like even Enzo, who's played by Neil Brown Jr., who's an amazing actor and incredibly hysterical. There is something about the lightness of Neil Brown Jr. and the way he played that character that starts to bleed into Nicholas Holt's character, where like I started writing lines where he started joking, and he was and Holt was happy to get those lines, and he delivered them awesome. And it's like, well, this is happening because I'm watching these people start to play off each other. And I watched the final film and I go, wow, there's these things that I wanted to happen, and they bleed into everybody else, and it just gives like a fuller picture. It's a wild thing. It's why I do this and I don't write books. You know what I mean?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so one of the hardest things about, certainly that I struggle with, is identifying the theme, right? Because quite often you go, I know what this is about. I've got my theme and I'm going for it. And then you get maybe a draft into the script, maybe 2 drafts in, and then you go, that's not what it's about.
Yeah.
It's about this. And then you go, oh, now I know. And so Private Oka, he goes from a guy willing to break his own hand to get out of combat duties to wanting to desperately go back to Bakuba and get back to work on the water pump. And you've got the water pump. I know in real life it was a bakery, you've said before, and right. I think it's so great that you changed it to a water pump. Makes poetically, it makes perfect sense. Yeah. But also, like, it's this Sisyphean task that they're doing. And so that's one Sisyphean task being captured by the film. But then through Nicholas Holt's arc, by wanting to go back and then being overruled by superior officers, were you trying to convey, because what I get from this, were you trying to convey the Sisyphean nature of America's involvement in the region, that once a tiny bit of progress is made, it all gets subverted by a bit of bureaucracy?
Yeah, what's interesting is that I thought not at all about geopolitics.
Yeah, and I've heard you say this. Yeah.
It's so funny. Like, I hope you and everyone watching, whoever watches this, gets to make a film, because you get to see what it's like be on the other side of things. Like, a movie comes out and everyone has these opinions or whatever else, and like nobody has the answer. But then when you're the writer and you make the film, it's like, oh, I know all of these things. And it's fascinating to be in the center of it. And people are like, oh, he made an anti-war movie. Oh, he made a pro-war movie. And it's like, that to me is kind of what I hope for. Is like, if you're honest to the character, then it will resonate in such a way that people, like, I'm only 50% of the experience. The audience is the other 50%, I can do what I can do. And then it'll go into your head and it'll, get, jumbled around with whatever's already there. And it'll either challenge what you believe or it'll reinforce it. Some of that's your choice and not mine. But what's fascinating is that I cared only about the experience of Ochre, right? And the desire to not participate in the war because you want to go home safe. And then realizing, well, I could not participate, or I could participate fully. Either way, I could die. Like, there's nowhere to hide. So now I'm starting to feel connected to these people, my fellow soldiers, and I'm also feeling connected to, the people of Iraq. So I'm going to invest myself fully, right? And then what's crazy about war, or at least my experience of it, is that when you make that decision, I'm going to invest myself fully, whether I live or die. I'm here today, and I'm going to make this day better for somebody. Like, I'm going to risk my life to make this day better. I'm going to save my friends or make them laugh, or I'm going to save this stranger that I've never met, or whatever. I'm going to participate, not because I want to be a hero, but because I don't want to look back on this experience and think to myself, I could have done more, right? You invest in that. And then no sooner do you start to feel like you've had success, does success get ripped away. And it doesn't have to be because of the US government. It could be because some, idiot with a bomb just happened to get past security. And then on top of that, you're like, okay, well, we fixed it once, we can fix it again. Well, guess what? Your time is up. You've been here for a year and a half, and it's time for you to go now. And the new people are coming in.
Yeah.
And that's
Well,
like, just be honest to that experience. And then all of a sudden you start drawing connections to like larger things. And I think that's fine.
I agree. And I think that is captured in the film, because I was going to talk about what's one of my favorite things to talk about, which is the final shot of a film. I'm really big on this. I bang on about it all the time on my channel, because I think that if possible, they should contain your theme. And so in Sandcastle, the final shot, you've got Private Oka heading towards a C-130, passing a procession of fresh soldiers who've just landed, and you get you really get the feeling of this revolving door, and you've got guys giving their lives so that the needle can move by half a degree. And I was going to ask you, actually, is that how the screenplay ends? I've had a quick look, but it looks like it's a bit different. But I think that's captured by the film, though.
Yeah, it is, and the screenplay ends with ends with that, but then there's like a subscript that just sort of tells you, like, what happened to the real life people, which we decided we didn't need, which is totally fine. And also, like, it works really well for the script. And the last thing I wanted to do is pull some of the people that I served in Iraq with, like, into a spotlight that they didn't ask to be in.
Yeah, of course.
I was quite happy to lose that. But that feeling of a revolving door was very much there, and very much captured by the director, Fernando Coimbra, because it does inherently speak to the theme of, it's interesting. Like, when you watch war films, and when I hear people, especially civilians, talk about war, it feels as if they're talking about it on like this like finite continuum. It's like starts here, ends here, or as I said before, it's like you got to take the hill, then you took the hill. Got to secure the town, then you secured the town.
Yeah.
And there's some resolution that exists, and that's not my experience at all. Like, there was no resolution whatsoever, and like I kind of have to make my own resolution, because Oker goes home, I went home, and there was still another 16 years of war left. You know what I mean?
Yeah, it was a lot more to come. Yeah.
Yeah. So like, war is just this. It's this wheel that just keeps going, and it picks up whatever's in its path, and then it shakes you off like a wet dog, and then it just keeps rolling more and more, and that's just the reality of it.
And the wheel never changes, because it just keeps growing, because it's got all the years of history behind it, which you learn about when you go to some of these regions. Like we were in Jordan in May, and just got a few little tidbits of information. I mean, one of the things I noticed when we were there was like, oh, there are stencils of Saddam Hussein everywhere. What's with that? And the answer was, oh, they love him here. Oh, okay. This is a safe place, though.
The world is a very complex, confusing place. And I think that's why, right? Because I want to wrestle with the complexity of it, and I have no interest or patience for people or art that wants to make complexity more simple, or wants to pander to my desire for things to be simple. I just find it boring, and I certainly can't, like I said, devote my life to it.
It would be remiss of me not to ask this question, because my wife asked me to ask you this question when she watched. So I watched it again with her, and she was asking. There are scenes where there's no doors on the Humvees, and she's like, "Isn't that a tactical disadvantage?"
So here's what's fascinating is that we couldn't get the vehicles. So this is the real story, is that when we were deployed to Iraq, we did not have armored vehicles. There were none of them, right? None.
Yeah.
So okay, well, the doors that we have aren't going to stop anything. So I'd rather take them off, make the vehicle lighter, and be able to exit and enter the vehicle faster. Now, the only vehicles we could get were armored vehicles. So we had a big meeting about it, the hotel room in Amman, and it's like, okay, do we take the doors off? Do we not take the doors off? And it's like, well, the vehicle's already not to period, right? And we just have to live with it. We could leave the doors on, but that's less interesting cinematically. So let's just fucking take the doors off. You know what I mean? Like, you just have to deal with what you have to. Matter of fact, like same situation with like the opening scene. Like we had to like fly tanks in from like the nearest town, but the tanks that they had are the tanks that they had. So it wasn't exactly the right period. But then it's like, this is the opening shot. You need helicopters, you need tanks. And do you just like not do that? Or do you just make the most of what you have because you can't afford $50 million to fly in the right tanks from Fort Bragg, North Carolina to Amman, Jordan? That's just the logistical stuff. But
that's filmmaking.
That's filmmaking, man. That's it.
Yeah. I sat next to a guy on the train the other day, and he was watching the latest Pixar film on his phone.
Mm-hmm.
How would you feel, honestly, if you saw someone watching Sandcastle on their phone on a train?
My honest answer is that it's none of my business. That's my honest answer. My hope is that I got to see it in the theater. I got to see it at the ArcLight in LA, and holy shit, the difference of watching, especially when it's your own movie, like the difference of watching it in the theater, it's just incredible. It's a totally different experience. And I'm a person who roots for the cinema experience. I want it to thrive. But I also know that like not everybody can eat at the best restaurants in the world. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's expensive to go to a theater. It's expensive to get babysitters. It sucks, but ultimately it's none of my business. I think, would I prefer, do I think that you're getting the best possible experience watching a movie on the phone? Absolutely not. Do I think you're doing a disservice to the hundreds and hundreds of hours of work that went into making it? Yeah, I do. But I also don't think that most of those people who put in that work think that they have a say in it anyway. Like you're going to watch I'd rather you watch the film than not.
I thought you might say that. Yeah.
I'd rather you watch the film in the cinema than on your phone.
Yeah.
But this is the only thing I worry about and it's a legitimate fear, is not just the cinematic experience being devalued, but movies themselves being devalued. I worry about that.
That's my biggest concern. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I don't. I mean, listen, I've devoted much of my life to movies, and I'm going to keep doing it because I love it very much. But I also know that like I can't expect everybody else to feel as deeply about movies that I do. And even if they do, I can't expect them all to have like a spare $100 lying around to take the family to them. I get it.
Yeah. Well, one of my best friends used to say, for some people, it's the lowest form of entertainment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And,
I mean, listen, there's, and again, I try to pass judgment on nothing. All I can do is decide how I want to spend my life and my time, and other people's choices are theirs. I try to take the positive outlook and say how wonderful it is that we live in a world where people have choices. I just hope that those choices don't devalue the thing that I care about so much,
Chris, I'm conscious of your time and how generous you've already been with me with all of your time. So I think we'll leave it there for this round, and maybe we can pick up again another time. But
yeah,
thank you so much for indulging me and answering my questions, and hopefully we can do it again sometime.
Absolutely, man. Thank you so much. I really, really appreciate it. And I'm sorry this took so long
it's fine.
to correct, but it's been a crazy pandemic.
Yeah, I understand, man. All right. Thanks so much again, and take care of yourself, and talk soon.
All right, man. Best to your family. Have a good one.
Cheers, mate. Thanks. Bye.
Bye-bye.